Okay, it's a real pleasure to be here. It's 4 years ago, actually, that I last got the privilege of coming to Warsaw. We ran an open government data camp in what had been a techno club, I think. I was told by Ellen Miller of Sunlight that it was the coolest venue she'd ever gone to for a conference. And so that was a lot of fun. So I've got two things, actually. I've got one thing I'm going to try and remember, which is I've got written in big letters on my thing, speak slowly. Even in English, even English people find me difficult. So I'm going to try and speak really slowly. I'm going to talk broadly. I'm going to talk about creating an open knowledge society. And I want to start just to tell you a little bit. Some of you, it's very kind, introduction. Some of you may know of open knowledge. If you don't, we are a global network, and we've been working since 2004. And our vision is to empower everyone with the knowledge to make a difference in their lives and their society. That's very broad, that vision. And I say global network in that while there is a core NGO I helped start, it's made up now of dozens of local groups and chapters around the world, many of whom are doing amazing work. And anyone, it's kind of a volunteer, community-driven setup, so people can come and join. So if you want an open knowledge in your region, you should know. And in fact, we've been doing, not with yourself, but recently a lot of work with a group in Macedonia, Metamorphosis, and we do a lot of collaboration. So there's now open knowledge groups in about 50 countries around the world. And just to say, so that was a huge vision. What does open knowledge actually, we focus on? One is, what we want is a world where all essential public interest information is open to everyone. So that means who owns companies, it means where your food came from, it's where your government spends your money. And that's number one. And the other aspect is, I should say, is imagine we had that. Imagine we had all that data and no one used it. All that information, and no one actually used it to make any difference in their lives or in anyone else's life. It would be pointless. And so the other aspect, and I just want to acknowledge here, like many of you in this room, but many, many other organizations, that's a huge thing, making information used and useful. But one thing we do is work actively to build tools, to build communities with others to make sure that that information is used to create insights that drive change, that help us combat injustice and inequality, that hold governments and corporations to account. And we've just heard some great examples of projects. We built something called CCAN, which is a data platform. We have open spending, which is kind of open street map for public money. The dream is ultimately all public financial information in one place, searchable, open. School of Data, where we're doing collaborations actually in the Balkans and around the world. Open Knowledge Festival, and of course things like the Global Open Data Index, which I sounded to something great that I would connect with later. And I want to come back for a moment. There's an issue with a lot of this, by the way. If you ever try to talk about your work to kind of people who aren't into this stuff, it's quite difficult. It's quite abstract, what we do. It's not like we're doctors, It's not like we're immediately saving someone, or we're giving kids vaccinations, or treating Ebola. This work is a little bit abstract. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about where this had come from in me. And I also wanted to take a moment to speak to your kind of greatness. Most of you, particularly, we do stuff in digital, we do stuff in technology. Many of you could be doing other things, probably better remunerated, based on my own personal experience, than what you're doing now. And you're taking a choice to do something, I think, incredibly exciting, interesting, and challenging to make a difference. And in a way that most people still don't get. And so just for me, I have to explain, like, all of this stuff. It never comes. It comes. Why did I help set up Open Knowledge and do this? So it never always starts from some grand dream. So as a kid, I had two probably kind of annoying characteristics. One was I was incredibly curious. I mean, I was a nightmare as a child. I don't know if many of you know small children, but they get to a stage when they start asking why all the time. And for me, it never stopped. you know. And all this quotes like, why is the sky blue? Do you actually know why the sky is blue? You know, where do babies come from? You know, why are some people, you know, why I grew up, I was incredibly privileged, I grew up in the UK. Why was I in a place that seemed so rich when some other people were so poor? I just kept on asking questions. I was really curious. And the other aspect that is always, you have to be angry. You have to have, why do you do this? You have to have something that drives you. And for me, I think I got angry quite early on about somehow, and I wouldn't say, I'm probably being a bit generous to myself about injustice, but you know, I remember when I went to school, and I was quite smart at school. I don't know what it's like, but that wasn't always a popular thing where I grew up. And I particularly remember when I went to my secondary school when I was about 12, everyone there already knew each other, and I didn't know anyone. And basically no one would speak to me. I remember we'd go on trips, and all the other kids, I would sit at the back of the bus and no one would speak to me. And the thing was, though, I was like, I don't care. I'm going to do something. And the other thing that I'd seen when I was younger, which is, I was lucky, which is that I wasn't so popular, but I was good. I was reasonably good at sports, which I don't know what it's like in other countries. But in England, that's really good to be good at sports. Not so good to be smart. And but there was this other kid in my class. You know, he was a sweet guy, but he was small. He wore glasses, and he was not very coordinated. And basically, for about 4 years, he kind of was made to cry every day. He was, you know, the way he was treated in school by the other kids. And the other thing is power. There is no better introduction to power than being in a schoolyard. You know, because there's someone who's in charge, and there's someone who definitely isn't. There's the kid who's excluded. There's the people in the middle who don't really care, but they maybe follow the leader. You can watch it all happen at age 8. And I did. And I think the other aspect was my sister got more pocket money than me. I mean, how unfair could that be? Right? I remember saying to my father, this is so unfair. I mean, it was a tiny amount of money, but she gets more money than I did when I was that old. And he said, look, I'm teaching you a really important lesson. Life isn't fair. And I said, I thought about this. I thought about this for about a year. And I came back and said, that's totally wrong. It's true that life is unfair, but our job is to make it fairer. So that was kind of where I came from. I think the last thing then, if I was explaining then open knowledge, because I was interested, you know, I got very occupied in that sense. I had this personal experience of injustice in a certain sense of school, of what it was like, of why was life, and why was also I still so lucky, what happened to me, you know, where I got to go to school and so on, but also seeing what happened, how I got treated, how others got treated, but also how did that get attached to something bigger? I could have done, you could go and be a teacher, you could be a doctor, you could do all kinds of things. And so the final thing was, you know, I loved learning. I did love school. I loved learning stuff, and I loved history. And I don't know, I mean, who here has heard of the Reformation? Just want to check. You could put up your hand. It's no bad if you haven't. The Reformation? We are in Poland, right? It's kind of like, still Catholic, right? And I read at one point there was a guy called William Tyndale. And I don't know if you know, but in the Middle Ages, basically in England, the Bible was not translated into English. It remained in Latin. And part of the reason was this was an immense amount of power for priests who were the only people who could read Latin, really, and could tell the populace what was actually in the Bible. And so one of the huge fights of the Reformation was to translate the Bible into a language that common people could actually read and understand. I mean, many of them couldn't read, but many could understand. And Tyndale was one of these reformers. He studied under Erasmus. He got power. I mean, it was a famous story about him, Erasmus saying, you know, I want plowmen to be able to recite the Testament, you know, not just priests. And he had a big fight. He was, you know, the Reformation was not popular. Remember, this was before Henry VIII changed things. He was around in the late, about 1500, 1510. And he at one point had an argument with a priest who said to him, we are better without God's laws than with the popes. I would prefer people to remain in ignorance of actually God's laws in order that they obey this other power. And Tyndale fundamentally disagreed with that. He actually traveled, he went abroad, he had to leave England, and he met Luther, and he translated the Bible into English. It was actually this Wycliffe had done one earlier, but it was the first printed copy of the Bible. And it was a huge impetus to the Reformation in England. He himself, though, was actually betrayed in 1535 by one of his good friends and was executed by the king 2 years before Henry VIII actually converted to Protestantism, as it were. Now, what did I get from this? One was the power of knowledge. The ability to access the Bible was one of the most essential pieces of knowledge in the Middle Ages, and it was confined to a tiny elite. Second, Tyndale could have gone out and taught himself. He could read the Bible in Latin, he could have just gone and taught people. But he did something at a higher level. He went up and translated the Bible, spent time translating it, and never met most of the people who would ever read his work and who would be affected by it. And I, in that sense, would have always been attracted to striking at the root, of going up that level to something that systematically can change things. And it's difficult because it's abstract. Rather than, I'm not immediately making someone's life better. And the other thing then was the digital revolution. So I'm now going to move relatively quickly because I've talked at this level of motivation. So knowledge is power. And the other thing that got me was I was lucky enough to be alive at this point when the digital revolution is happening. And it is extraordinary. I mean, can we believe it, right? I mean, it's so incredible what is happening, for good or bad to us right now. We are moving into a world where all that glitters is bits. So even more, knowledge has always been power, but it's only been a part of it, right? But now, we're entering a world in a few decades, maybe even a few years, where basically information is pretty much everything. Whether you're talking about commerce, whether you're talking about culture, we are in the information age, and who controls information controls us in that sense. So I've talked about some of the motivations. I'm going to go through this. These are the kind of motivating questions. Where does our money go? We had a wonderful example earlier talking about climate change. Now I'm going to go from this really high level and motivation that I hope has connected you. I'm now going to talk for a very brief period about a detail about a particular thing. And that's my point. I'm trying to give you that motivation to understand we have to go from sometimes this overall motivation to very specific things that we, each of us, do in our projects that try to make that difference. And the moment for me, which is make sure that all essential public interest of information is open and that people get to use it to drive change. I'm going to talk about something called frictionless data briefly. I'm going to go from this incredible motivation right down to the very, very detail for a moment. So frictionless data is really the motivation for doing open data or any of this other stuff, actually. What it is we want information to get from people who have it to people who can use it. Susanna at the Fair Play Alliance, people who have information, it might be government, it might be others, to people who can use it to create insight that drives change. We want to reduce friction. And the thing is, this is my wonderful diagram done 10 minutes before this talk. I realized it wasn't clear enough, which is basically a lot of this work, and this is where we also connect with innovation and we connect with the government and they want more startups and all the other stuff we have. There's people who have data and there's people who want to use it, and there's all this friction in between. Now that friction, I'll come back to it, there's two kinds. There's more kinds, but you can see one is it's locked up. I'm running short of time. So I'll just give you a very simple example, but data is frequently locked up. That's part of the friction, right? You can never get it. They don't even give it to you. It's never going across that wonderful arrow over there. And here's a silly example. This is from 2008, but I just think it's a wonderful example. Traffic data. If you live in the UK, traffic's a big thing in your life. There's lots of it, and it often goes very slowly. And actually, the government collects data every year on what all the traffic flows are about the UK. And they have it in this thing called MIDAS. I'm going to go quite quickly. And I wrote to them saying, I'm a UK citizen, you've got all this data, you don't sell it, can I have it? Even better, I was a researcher at the time. So 6 emails later, and you go and read all of this, but basically what they say is 2 key things. You could have the data on 2 conditions. One is you never give it to anyone else. 2, you never use it to criticize government policy. It's actually written in the condition there. The data will not be used to contradict or challenge, item 4, or challenge any research project, works or statement made by the government, the Department of Transport, or the Highways Agency. I mean, at least they were really upfront about it, you know? So that's one thing. So why do we want open data? Because that's the thing, right? Is that you don't have access. It costs a lot of money. You can't even get it. It's restricted. That's a big part of frictionless data, right? But there's also a second part, and there's the open definition, which defines exactly what we mean. The other is machine access. So the other huge part of friction isn't just that we can't get it. This is the US government, which is publishing data. This is employment numbers, which are a pretty big deal. I don't know if you know, but basically getting data out of that with a computer is basically equivalent to writing, it's basically pretty good AI. If you can write something that can parse that, you're well on your way to writing artificial intelligence. I mean, I don't know if you know, but we as humans can tell there are columns and rows, but it's pretty difficult. So there's a lot of work cleaning up the data. This is what the data actually tells you. But there's a lot of work basically getting data around at the moment. So there's one thing I want to leave you with today, and it's an example of going from this very high level of motivation to what we actually have to turn that into day to day to make a difference. Have I run out of my slide? Here we go. Is frictionless data. So one thing about this is, the one thing at the moment is we have all these people who create stuff, we have people who want to get it, and there's nothing in between. So I don't know if you've ever seen those things that have you ever seen containers? Do people know what I mean for containers, for shipping containers? Put up your hand if you know what a shipping container is. Right? You've all seen a shipping container. Do you know once upon a time there weren't shipping containers? Shipping containerization was invented in 1956. Before that, people loaded data on docks. They had Steve Dawes. Who's seen On the Waterfront? Anyone seen On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando? Andrew has case going. Acknowledging your age or my age, I don't know. Everyone's young here. They don't watch Marlon Brando. Okay, but people loaded stuff by hand onto ships. It was incredibly inefficient. And along came containerization. Containerization dropped shipping costs by about 1,000. And so the frictionless data, I'm not going to go into technical details, but I can come and talk to me after you're excited, but it's this creation of something called a data package, which is containerization for data. How do we get data from people and governments who produce it to people like Susanna who wants to use it, or startups, or whoever, that much quicker? And whether it's open or closed, in fact, I don't care, but this will massively benefit open data. And I won't go into the standards. So to wrap up, because I'm over time, the conclusion is that we are entering this incredible world where all that glitters is bits, where the power of knowledge that's always been there is suddenly kind of everything. And there is going to be a fight, believe me, for who controls that power in this information age. And it's really weird, right? Because pretty much everything you wanted, everyone, in the Middle Ages, you controlled land. And land has this quality that not everyone can live on the same piece of land. Otherwise, life would be a lot easier. Right? Not everyone can eat the same piece of. If I have an orange, you can't eat it as well, normally. Okay? But information is different. It is naturally shareable. But it's also, if you control it, immensely valuable. And so we have a choice in this world that we're entering between open and closed, between collaboration and control, between sharing versus exclusion, and empowerment versus exploitation. I mean, is Facebook empowering you? I don't think so. Okay, so to finish, we are becoming this open knowledge society, and at the heart of that, we want to put openness. Because we want a society, an information society built around collaboration and not control, and empowerment and not exploitation. Thank you very much.